Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the rise of insider threats and how to prevent them. We're going to get started here as we've reached the top of the hour. My name is Bob Erdman, and I am the Cybersecurity Product Manager here at Core Security. We are a member of the HelpSystems family, so we're very glad to be joining you today. And I have a partner with me, Mike Lynch. Mike, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Hey, everybody. My name is Mike Lynch. I'm a senior sales engineer and solutions consultant with Core Security, and I currently support our IGA and IAM solutions and products. Great to be talking with you today.
So here at HelpSystems and Core Security, we do have quite a number of solutions focused around identity, focused around security, everything from identity governance administration to privileged access management, to pen testing and advanced threat hunting. So if there's anything that you see on this list that you'd like to talk to us about, please feel free to reach out. But today we're going to focus on insider threats, how we can prevent them, what some of the costs are, the things that we're seeing out in the field, some of the scenarios that are happening to different organizations around the globe. So we based this webinar on a threat report. Everybody that is attending here and is signed up is going to get a copy of that. We did that in conjunction with Cybersecurity Insiders. Cybersecurity Insiders is a great organization, 400,000 strong, very active out on LinkedIn and in other areas. So if you're not a member of that group, we certainly encourage you to join up on that group, get lots of great information, great reports, great threat intelligence, and things that you can use in your day-to-day lives. So insider attacks, we are definitely seeing that those are on the rise by all accounts, all the different information that we see out in the field. So many people are starting to realize that these have become much more frequent over the past 12 months, and they're not always malicious. They can be, sometimes they're just mistakes. Sometimes they're hackers that are stealing credentials and faking their way in as an insider. And it's demanding increasing amounts of time from all of different security professionals and security practitioners. So when we ran this survey, it was good to see that 70% have realized that this is actually happening. We still have 30% that we need to work on, but more and more people are coming to realize that this is a very big area that we need to be concerned with. Many organizations are vulnerable to insider threats. The majority of the organizations we surveyed see themselves as moderately to extremely vulnerable to an insider threat. And there's a number of reasons that people feel that way. Outside attackers are becoming much more sophisticated, of course, in their malicious activities. They're using social engineering, phishing emails, scanning through LinkedIn and other data stores out on the internet to get details on your environments. Internally, IT systems are becoming more and more complex. People are having to do more with less. There's a lot of different screens that they work with. Not necessarily everybody has had the training that we desire. And all of those different things lead to vectors that can be infection vectors into the environment. So it gives people pathways to get in and do things that are either accidentally malicious or intentionally malicious within your environment. We do see a very small number that think they're not vulnerable at all. I would generally disagree with that. Everybody's vulnerable. You may not think you're vulnerable today, but if I suddenly become disaffected with my job, I can suddenly become a malicious insider. So we need to be paying attention to these things, controlling people's access, making sure that we know what they're doing on a day-to-day basis to protect our businesses. One of the things that we see out there is that people don't feel like this costs them a lot of money. Over half of the people in the survey that responded believe it would probably be less than $100,000 if they had to contain, remediate, and deal with one of these. And as we can see on this data, the vast majority of them thought it would be less than $500,000. And studies show that this is really substantially higher many times, because there's a lot of different costs that are involved when these breaches happen. Besides the monetary loss from somebody maybe stealing some data, And that averages around $150 per breach data record. So if somebody's going in and taking your customer data or somebody's credit card data out of your stores, that by itself is fairly expensive. But then there's forensics issues that you have to deal with discovering what happened, making sure that nothing else has happened, cleaning up and taking care of the issues that were found out, possibly notifying affected customers. There's reputational loss to your business or your organization. This can lead to higher insurance costs, not only in cyber insurance, but in other insurance as well. It can affect your credit and borrowing costs. Many of the large organizations now are starting to look at the risk of you having a cyber incident as a peg number in what they're going to charge you to borrow money. You may have to hire outside consultants. You're certainly going to have internal people spending time that they should be doing something else, chasing down these issues. You may have to provide new equipment. It's not always possible to cleanly remediate an infection. Sometimes the equipment itself has to be replaced to close the loophole that somebody got in through. You're going to have to do additional training, etc. So it can be quite a large amount. Some of the other recent reports out there estimate the average cost, ranges from about $270,000 to over $20 million at some large organizations. And of course, these costs will vary widely based upon the incident type. Hacking and credential stealing is usually more money. Accidental insider threats is generally less money. And by how big your organization is or what type of industry you're in as well. Smaller organizations are, of course, generally going to be on the lower side. Larger financial firms, multinationals, regulated companies generally are going to be much on the higher side with that. And of course, in general, the faster that you can discover and contain an issue, the cheaper it usually is to deal with. So overall, accidental insider attacks, about 50%, maybe a little bit more. And then the other half is kind of split between malicious insiders and actual hacking, like credential theft, where people are stealing credentials so that they look like an insiders that come into your system. Overall, negligent insiders certainly cost the most money. So just as a general, there has been many more of those incidents. It's much easier for somebody to accidentally compromise an environment. So overall, that's a bigger number. On a per incident basis, though, the most expensive is definitely credential theft, when somebody maliciously steals access to your systems, goes in looking like Bob, and suddenly has access to everything that I have access to do. And we see some different types. We've talked about them a little bit already. Inadvertent insiders, accidental breaches. Phishing emails is a big one here. Everybody sees phishing emails happening lately. That is the most popular vector of infection, and people have gotten really good at it. It's not like you're going to get something full of typos anymore that's coming from some weird domain across the world. Everybody has spell check. Everybody knows how to grab an email from a company, duplicate it, grab a logo off a website. Things look really good these days. Negligent insiders, of course, also. So many times that's just something ignoring your security policies, especially if you're working with cloud-enabled devices. So developers having access to production machines happens all the time. It's a really big no-no. But somebody just ignoring policies, doing what they want to do because they know how to do it. Maybe it's faster, maybe it's cheaper, but it's not always best for security. And then, of course, malicious insiders as well. So somebody that is willfully trying to cause damage, disaffected employees, somebody from the competition, somebody from the outside stealing credentials to get back in. Those are the main three categories that we see. Negligent employees are really becoming a bigger and bigger problem. People just have trouble getting enough training to their employee base to understand why things are set the way that they're set and why you should care about some of these issues. Everybody thinks it's never going to happen to them. I'm smarter than that. I don't need to worry about it. So phishing, and especially spear phishing, are very feared, and for a good reason. All it takes is one click and you can suddenly allow someone access into your systems. So I can send you an email. Hidden inside of that email, I can be burying some kind of executable attachment. I could hide it inside of a Office document with a macro. I can hide it inside of white space on the screen. I can hide it inside a malicious download link. And once somebody clicks on that, now suddenly I have a beachhead inside of the organization, and I can expand my footprint from there. That is one of the biggest things that we're seeing these days. We also, of course, see people with poor passwords, see people with orphaned accounts. Orphaned accounts are another big thing that happens, especially in larger organizations with a lot of turnover. So we'll see people creating users, and as people exit the company, there's not always a great cycle of cleanup happening as people are going out the door, be it just for internal systems, but also external as well. All of the things that I had access to in my job role. Maybe I have partner accounts with tech suppliers. Maybe I have ways to download diagrams or download specs from subs that are working with me or prime contractors that are working with me. All kinds of different things I might have access to. And all of those different things need to be cleaned up as we walk through that environment. And Mike, I suspect you've seen a lot of different things as you've worked with other companies related to some of these areas.
Yeah, Bob, absolutely. I mean, orphan account is a big one. A lot of people don't necessarily think of those as a risk. An orphan account basically is an account that you can't match up to an owner, right? So it was created outside of a process where you couldn't make that link, and so most companies don't know about orphan accounts, and so they're great places for these bad actors to get access, because nobody's looking into those accounts anymore, or they can create one, and if you don't have a process to detect them, then these bad actors can create these orphan accounts, and they're just doors for them to get back in the organization anytime they want. And so Bob, just kind of talking a little bit more about this slide, what types of workers pose the biggest security risk? And it's not a surprise, really. I mean, it should be pretty obvious to most people that 59% said privileged IT users or admins, and it seems pretty obvious that they can pose a security risk, because if those credentials got into the wrong hands, and those accounts are highly privileged, and people could move around the organization or do damage. It's definitely a best practice to implement a PAM, a privileged access management solution, to help secure your privileged systems and applications. Additionally, I think a good IGA program can help make sure that the privileged access is assigned properly, and make sure that the appropriate approvals are in place, and checks and balances there. If you look at the next area, though, just slightly below the 59% for privileged IT users and admins, 52% of the people that were talked to said that contractor accounts, service providers, and temporary workers pose a security risk. And a lot of organizations that I talk with concentrate around employees, but they don't treat contractors and service providers and temporary workers in that same priority. They're typically a secondary priority. And the thing is this category of user is often a good target for bad actors, because turnover is high in a lot of these cases, because it's contractor or seasonal or service type workers. So turnover is high, with many people changing in those respective categories. And so if there's a lack of process, orphan accounts can quickly appear in an organization, because if there's not a good process to clean up those accounts when those workers, like when a contractor leaves or when the seasonal work is over, those accounts can sit around. And like we talked about earlier, bad actors don't need a highly privileged account like an IT or an admin account to do financial damage to an organization. So you take an accountant, for example, maybe you've got some seasonal workers that you hire for accounting, when taxes are due, or you've got contractors that come in to the business at certain times, like the holidays when there's a high volume of sales. Well, those workers can have, they might not have network or admin privileges, but they might have privilege to a financial system. So maybe they can create purchase orders or approve purchase orders. And so getting access to one of those accounts, while it might not seem highly privileged, could allow a bad actor to do some real damage there. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. So another question we asked was around the effectiveness of managing user privileges. 77% of people that were surveyed said they consider their management of user privileges not at all to moderately effective. Many organizations have poor or very manual processes when it comes to management of user privileges. Best practices that I see around this category. One is implementing some kind of automated provisioning, around the various stages of the user lifecycle. So as you're onboarding users, or they're moving through the organization, getting promotions, reporting to different managers, et cetera, and finally, what we call leavers, or people that are terminated or leaving the organization. All those stages of the user lifecycle generally require some kind of accounts to be created, or accounts to get deactivated or deprovisioned, or additional access to be granted. And so automating as much of that as possible helps, like I talked about in the other slide, it also helps prevent orphan accounts, for example, if you're doing a good job of cleaning those up. Another best practice is the implementation of RBAC, or role-based access controls, to ensure that users get assigned to the right amount of access needed for their job. Assignment of the right access assures the user will be able to do their job with just the right amount of access. You don't want to give them too much, obviously, but you don't want to give them too little. If you give them too little, we call that under provisioning. Then they either can't do their job, or what we see a lot of times is, because there's not a good process in place to request access, they'll actually go to somebody else in the organization and borrow their credentials, and now you've got a security risk there, right, with people knowing other people's credentials. And obviously, if they're over provisioned, then you want that to be looked at as well, because you don't want to give people more access than they need. So let's go on to the next slide there. All right, so this is a question I get asked all the time, and I can see it when I talk with different prospects and different clients. Why is managing user privileges so difficult? And I would say these are the big four areas that I talk about all the time with prospects and customers. But one is, it's because there's such a large number of systems and apps in a typical environment. I mean, even the small companies that I talk with today, have at least 10 different applications, and in large environments, they've got in excess of 100. And so when you've got that many systems that requires access and accounts, it's very hard to manage. And so this is a reason why it's good to have an IGA solution in place to help you manage those things. Another big one is that a lot of organizations just have no clear idea of access for various roles. So if you look at like an accountant or some kind of a role in their organization, they couldn't even tell you today what those users need. And so what ends up happening is that a lot of people just copy access. A new accountant gets hired, we're just going to take an existing one and copy their access rights and their accounts to this new person. And what they may not realize is that this accountant you're copying may be over provisioned, or they may have access to certain systems because they're on special projects, and by copying their access without looking at it carefully, you're inadvertently taking risk and moving it throughout the organization. Another big one is just the lack of a centralized management process. So a lot of people today, when a new employee gets onboarded or when requests are made, there's no centralized place where all that where that workflow is defined, or where those requests are made and approved. And so a lot of people are just sending tickets out to different application owners to set up the access. And because they don't have that centralized management, they lose a lot of visibility into what accounts people have. And this leads into the last one here. Creating accounts and assigning access is often a really manual process. In many organizations, onboarding of a new employee can take weeks, and it requires that the appropriate access would need to be manually fulfilled, like I said earlier, by tickets, or, IT would have to manually go in, or application owners would have to go in and set all that up. So basically, it takes a long time to set up, and an effective IGA solution would reduce that amount of time for users to get access. It would automate the creation of the accounts and access, and what it does there is it frees up the IT resources to focus on greater risk reduction, and priorities around reducing manual mistakes.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, that gives us a lot to think about. There's definitely other things that we can deal with around that side, around provisioning, around how we manage our user classes and our user bases as they're doing different things. And we actually went out and asked, as part of this survey that we did with Cybersecurity Insiders, do people have good and appropriate controls to prevent insider attacks inside of their organization? And as we saw from some of those earlier slides about effectiveness and different things, we got about a 50-50 split for people that believe they have good controls and people that believe they don't. And the don't was actually slightly higher than the do. So we want to make sure that we have good and effective controls around these things, so people don't feel confident in their ability to prevent and monitor and detect these different things. A lot of times the focus is on the outside, looking at what's coming in, who's trying to attack my environment from China or from Russia or from some other malicious, advanced, persistent threat actor. And they're not really seeing what's happening inside the environment as well. We have seen the average time to discover and contain these insider threats is just over 70 days. Less than 20% of the incidents were contained within a month. So the longer that dwell time is within the environment where people have access to do things maliciously, the more expensive these incidents cost us as a business. And the higher rates of data is lost, the higher rates of money is lost. So these things are getting really important, and we generally have to deal with them as fast as possible. We want to see what's happening instantly, know that people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Having that identity governance in place helps to protect us, because if somebody does do something accidentally or attempts to do something maliciously, that gives us a way to stop them from having access to things that we don't want them in, areas that we don't want them in, and it limits the amount of damage that they can do when they attempt to penetrate our environments. And there's a few different areas that we like to focus on with threat prevention. Of course, deterrence, making sure that we have good access controls, making sure that we have good encryption on our data, appropriate policies across our solutions. Detection, of course, is also very high. So how do we know that somebody is doing something? Monitoring what our users are doing, having appropriate insider threat pieces together, and being able to do some post-forensics analysis and make sure that if we do have a breach, that we can deal with that. So what has happened in our environment? Having a SIM, incident management control, having a way to see and analyze the different things that are happening within our environment, know what's happening on our network. It's not always just users at a Windows PC that could cause damage to the system. Sometimes it's through an IoT device, a Wi-Fi access control, a security camera, maybe it's a card system to get into your parking lot. All of these things are interconnected now. All of these things are potential points for a breach, where somebody can misuse their access or maliciously try and take control of a piece of the environment, get that beachhead into the systems, and then move farther along and do things that we don't want them to be doing, of course. And here at HelpSystems, of course, security, we've got lots of tools all across that spectrum to make sure that we can provide that layered security model. And that's really the model that we like to encourage, defense in depth. So we want to be looking all the way from our outside controls to our inside controls, making sure that we're protecting ourselves in the best way possible. So in addition to the IGA type solutions that Mike talked about, providing that intelligent visual context to manage identities and security risks across the enterprise, there's also several other tools you can use to prevent and detect those insider threats. SIM solutions like Event Manager, on-the-wire tools for APT and next-gen AV hunting like Network Insight. And that's actually one of the tools that our users have reported has been a really important one for them, because it lets us see what's happening inside of that system. If somebody does accidentally click on a phishing email, pull a piece of malware into the environment, being able to see that that malware has come in and attached and is starting to do traffic, letting us take control of those CNC actors and kick them out of the environments. Risk controls are very important. We want to manage our risk. As we talk to those C-level suite executives, it's all about risk. What am I accepting as risk versus what am I paying to prevent that risk? Looking at that dollar cost is how we get our budget so that we can implement our proper security controls. Almost 80% are using some sort of security perimeter and defense controls. Definitely database, file monitoring solutions, being able to see that specific files have changed, that specific people have accessed certain data, and it's not always on your inside-facing things. Think towards your external websites and other things that you share to the outside world. If I can get onto a system and change the content on your public-facing web page, so now as your customers come to visit it, I can do malicious things to them. It's another place we definitely want to look, especially with the file integrity monitoring, so that I can see if anything is being touched in my public-facing environments. Having good ways to do security event dashboards is also one of the top three. More and more we'll see these security professionals out in the field have 6, 8, maybe 10 different screens that they're trying to monitor, because they have all of these different applications and solutions, and they're having to keep tabs on all of this different data and trying to access it all in different places. So the more and more we like to consolidate that into single panes of glass, give them easy ways to view that data, correlate that data between systems, so that we know something happening over here on one side of the company and something happening over here on another side of the company correlates to something we need to investigate as a possible malicious activity. Access violations are another good indicator of risk, either people getting into things accidentally that they shouldn't have been getting into. Many times we'll see some of those negligent or possibly malicious users accessing data they shouldn't have any reason to be in. So just because I have rights, I was provisioned incorrectly to get to a financial system. If it's not part of my job, I shouldn't be going to that financial system. And we want to make sure that our security professionals are alerted when those types of things happen, because that gives us those early indicators. The quicker that we know what's going on, the quicker we can contain it, and we can go in and fix those things before they become a big money loss for us. And also making sure that we just have good record monitoring, good data loss prevention. Again, ways to protect ourselves, limit our risk, limit the possible financial damage that can be done if somebody does attempt to do something malicious within our environment. Security event dashboards, we did talk about a little bit. We feel that's a very important one. And there's many different things that come through these dashboards, many different ways to integrate these SIM solutions into our environments, or these other event log and monitoring solutions in our environments. You know, some of our different regulations force us to do this. If you're taking credit card, PCI type data, you know, needing to know when you have login failures, needing to know when you have improper access that's exceeded. Sometimes you need to know orphaned accounts, as Mike talked about earlier. Some of the rules, you need to be able to report on inactivity from an account. So if Bob hasn't logged in 60 days, you need to know that, because I probably don't need to have that access at all. And you can take that away from me, again, limiting your risk. So regulatory compliance reporting coming straight out of these dashboards. Sometimes it's actually the lack of regulatory compliance. That's what security is mostly concerned with. When I see things that aren't up to spec, I need to be able to go in and remediate those issues. So we do have a poll that we'd like to put out. I'm going to launch that here, and we'll give you a little bit of time to respond to that. And then we'll definitely have some time here for questions. So you all should be seeing your poll window coming up. I know we've covered a lot of different data here, a lot of different things. As you get some time to digest some of the deeper points inside of that report, we definitely recommend reading that. It's a great report. Cybersecurity Insiders always does a great job with us. We love working with that team and getting this data out to everybody so that we can help enable all of those security professionals out in the field. It looks like most people are almost done here. We'll give just a little bit longer for people to get their answers in. Another thing that we're seeing more and more people utilizing, as I give people a little bit of time to answer here, is actual pen testing. Either you have internal red teams or people using external people to do that environment testing. You know, you can't fix what you don't know is out there. More and more we see organizations taking advantage of that. We think that's a great thing. If you can have somebody, you know, that professionally knows how to penetrate an environment, attempt to get into an environment that can identify your security risks and controls and give your security teams more time to work on those. So I'm going to close the poll here. Thank you to those that responded. And now we'd like to open it up for questions. So you should have a questions window inside of your environment where you can type those in. And then we will be able to answer those for you. Now, we did have a question coming in about spear phishing and around best practices for, minimizing that cyber risk for some of the higher level executives and other people within the organization. We see phishing training as a really good option for people. Some organizations that we talk to, that's their main way of training their users, especially if you're a large organization and it's hard to get people into classes and different things like that. In general, we like to see phishing used in a training rather than a punishment type of environment. You want to enable your users to be better and better at this, and going in there looking very adversarial to them can kind of get that us versus them with IT security, and it usually ends up in a bad way. We want to let them know that we're enabling them to be better at what they do. So generally, we like to target classes of users. So maybe not one specific person. We're not going to go out and do our best to compromise the CEO. We're going to go out and look at different user classes, different job roles, different types of functionality, and tailor our testing towards those different user environments. And we want to make sure that we're not doing it in something that maybe will adversely affect how they perform their day-to-day operations. So, for example, we've seen people that have food trucks. They're downtown in a metro environment. The food truck comes around and they're shipping those menus out over Twitter or whatever every so many days. We probably don't want to use that as a target because we don't want people to now be afraid to go use those services. So we want to make it look like something a little bit different as we kind of work with that. So usually what we'll do, start out with something fairly easy to detect. So we want to go out and kind of get the low-hanging fruit, get people understanding what to look for, looking for malicious domains, looking for slightly off logos, things like that. And as our users get better at detecting our training environments, then we can step up the complexity of what we're doing to them and help move them along that path where they're really understanding what to recognize. Usually we'll want a way to track that, of course. We want to know who clicked on what, where they went. But like I said, we don't want to make that a punishment, at least not at first. We want to make it a training opportunity. So not singling out Mike because Mike clicked on this thing he shouldn't have, and now we're going to ridicule him. We want to use that as a way to help the whole group. There are, of course, cases where over time there has to be some type of issue involved. If Mike is continually clicking on things, he's compromising the security of our environment, then maybe there is something where HR has to get involved. But generally, we want to make this a good experience for them so that we can help train them to be better. Any other comments you have on that phishing stuff, Mike?
No, not at all. I think you covered it pretty well there. Thanks, Bob.
All right. We have another one asking about deploying different tools to mitigate different risks in the environment. I think if you're looking at, core security and HelpSystems in general, we're very much about defense in depth around our tool sets. So things like IGA, when identity governance is deployed in an organization, maybe in conjunction with privileged access management, it's very much about getting the right amount of access to a user at the right time, taking that access away when it's no longer needed. So understanding what a different job role is, what that job role requires, having those easy ways to review. Most organizations, hopefully all of them on the phone here with us, are doing annual reviews or semi-annual reviews of access for their users. So when you see accountant A has slightly more access than accountant B, why is that? Do they really need that? Should that be taken away? As Mike talked about, over provisioning accidentally sometimes because we're just trying to get through things quickly, bring our users on, and copying stuff around. We can get all the way down to privileged access management in the solution where it is just-in-time elevated access. I should never be going in as a standard job role as an admin. I should be going in as my standard user, elevating to elevated privileges as I need them, having those elevated privileges taken away when it's no longer required. That helps limit the risk of my account doing something that it shouldn't be doing. And then we can step out from there, bringing in SIEM security monitoring solutions where we can correlate that data coming in from across the environment. Again, we're looking to identify critical issues as quickly as possible, mitigate them as quickly as possible. That limits the risk to our environment. Having compromises long-term access. Some of those APT threat actors, we didn't talk about them much, but we see dwell times coming down the last few years, but they're still well over 100 days. They used to be almost 300 days, so it's getting better. But the longer somebody can be inside of your environment, living off the land, finding their way into that crown jewels of your data, the more damage they can cause. So the quicker that we can determine that people are doing things they shouldn't be, that you have compromises in your environment, the faster we can take care of that, the more damage we can limit. Another question, are there any tools available for HR, IT, physical security, and others to look for indicators of compromise? That one, we very much in that type of realm would be looking towards something like our network insight tool. So sitting on the wire, watching the network traffic from everything in your environment. It's not an agent, it's not running on an operating system. So it doesn't matter what that endpoint is. It could be a smart coffee maker or a thermometer back in a data center rack. We have seen compromises in all of those things, and that allows us to see everything happening within the environment, to be able to hunt for those threat actors that may be attempting to compromise and then take malicious action inside. It's amazing what people can do to breach an environment these days. It's not just that I got into your Windows box and stole a credential, although that's a common way to do things. I may get into some IoT device that somebody hooked up. Sometimes we'll see it being very inadvertent. It's not always somebody did something on purpose wrong with security, but say I set down a new printer in my office because I just want my print jobs to be close to me so I don't have to get up all the time. Most of those new printers now have Wi-Fi. Most people don't do anything to secure that Wi-Fi because they're not going to use it. It's like, hey, here's that quick cell phone thing I can print from my phone. I don't care about that. And you blow that off. Well, now that Wi-Fi signal is sitting there out in the open. That gives somebody a way to penetrate into the environment and then possibly get that beachhead and foothold and then move out from there. So we need to be looking at all aspects of what happens inside of our network. That looks like all the questions. If anybody has any last minute questions here, please feel free to get those. Will handouts be available after this webinar? Yes. Everybody in here will get a copy of the webinar slides. We'll have a link to the recording as well as a link to that insider threat full report so that you can go ahead and read that after the fact here and get the additional parts of that data. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We'll give you a little bit of time back. I know everybody in the East Coast is probably trying to get out to lunch, so go ahead and enjoy that. We're happy to always give these good educational webinars here at HelpSystems. Please pay attention to we post these on Facebook, we post them on LinkedIn, we post them on Twitter. We have lots of different topics that we cover all the time related to security, automation, IT operations management, different things across your environment.